Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Event Industry News podcast with me, James Dickson. Wishing you all a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever or wherever you tune into today's podcast from. And I'm excited to say that for the first time in a long time, we've now got a sponsor on board for the podcast, which is fantastic. Great to have some people, involved in supporting this. Present Communications are our brand new headline podcast sponsor. Present provides broadcast quality live, hybrid, and virtual event production trusted by organizations where reliability really matters. From corporate town halls and conferences to high-profile live streams, they design and deliver fully resilient systems that work first time. Big thanks to the team over at Present Communications for supporting the podcast. And you'll hear sort of plenty from them over forthcoming episodes of the podcast. So on with today's talking and chatting and all things events, and we're going to be looking into the world of stress within event managers, specifically in-house event managers, and the reference point is a report that has been commissioned and built and put together by the company of which my guest today is the CEO. I'm delighted to say that for the first time, we welcome to the Event Industry News podcast, Alex Pearn. Alex is the CEO of ClinkClink. Alex, a very warm welcome to you.
James, it's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having us on.
Not a problem at all. And Alex and I were just talking off air before today's episode about the fact that we're both dog owners. So I've got a couple in the house. My dogs are here. Alex has got his dog there, and we're both discussing, what the sort of the show stop procedure is for delivery drivers knocking at front doors and dogs going absolutely balmy. So if there is an edit in today's podcast, you can safely assume, podcast followers, that one or both sets of dogs have gone bananas because somebody's knocked at the door.
And that's absolutely, yeah. My dog's very cute, but he has no recall, and doesn't like the delivery man. So it's like a post-COVID video conference peril all the time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, it's great. So we've got that out of the way straight off the bat. Let's get serious for a moment, Alex. We're going to be talking today about stress amongst event managers, a report that ClinkClink have recently published. But before we get into that, let's give everybody a little bit of context and frame exactly who you are and what ClinkClink is as an organization.
Yeah, thanks, James. ClinkClink's 20 years old this year, which feels like a huge milestone. We've gone through a couple of recessions, a financial crash, that's sort of, and a great pandemic, to boot. So, we've kind of come out the other side of that, and I think fairly resilient. There's 6 of us in the house, and a fantastic team. Some of those team members have been with us for more than 10 years. And we are very much a people-centric business. We tend to work for a lot of in-house teams, in-house event managers. We work for, sort of corporates, as well as a lot of membership organizations as well. Absolutely love, what we do and the industry we work in. So, yeah, that's sort of ClinkClink in a nutshell.
Absolutely. It took 20 years. I'm 16 years this year freelance, and I don't know how you feel, but mine's sort of gone past in the blink of an eye. I still have to remind myself that, I guess I would say I'm relatively experienced now, despite it feeling like yesterday that I went into business for myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I started out very much in that freelance sphere, and I think it's given me a huge appreciation for what the freelance community adds. This industry would not work without an incredible talent pool that we have in the freelance and in-house community. But yeah, big shout out to all the freelancers. Absolutely fantastic.
I mentioned at the top of today's episode that what we were going to dive into is a report that's called "Do You Sleep Well at Night? Sleep, Stress and Wellbeing in UK Event Management." This is a report that ClinkClink have done on the well-being of in-house event managers specifically during 2025 and what can be improved upon, or using the report as a means to look at what can be improved upon this year. And I guess subsequent to this year as well, going forward into the future. What was the thinking behind the report? What made you and drove you to commission it?
It's been this report's been sort of 10 or 15 years in the making, and that sounds quite lofty, but I'll give that some context. So about 15 years ago, there was a report done and I think it was one of the papers had said, what are the most stressful jobs? And number 3 in that list, for some reason, was event management. And the top 2 were brain surgery, the theatre of war, then came events, then it was firefighting, or being, a firefighter, and then, add lots of stressful industries. And I think it struck a chord because I think we all, as we read it, and sort of batted it around in the industry for a while, we couldn't quite work out why we were number 3. And it felt like a slightly odd report. I think there was a lot of, sort of clickbait with it. But other reports have come out since, and they've all put event management, up there, in that top 10. And I think what we wanted to do was try and understand why that was, and try and understand the differences between when people talk about stress. There's good and bad stress, and to try and start to use a slightly different language around it maybe, and start to be less generalized about that language as we sort of started to look at it.
And it's interesting that you said good and bad stress there, because as people who work in events will know that there are times everyone has felt stress inevitably, but the pressure and the feeling that goes with working in this industry, and when you get close to events particularly, good stress, I suppose, are we defining it as that feeling of anticipation? Because I get it still, 16 years in, and you're constantly cross-referencing things, but to me that's always felt like you're bothered. If you're feeling that little bit of pressure and that little bit of anticipation, and almost like, slight stage fright, I suppose, for the performers amongst our followers, to me that's always been a good thing, because it shows that you're switched on, that you're alert to things and what's going on. So there is good stress and there is bad stress, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is so important to understand. We're not experts in this by any stretch. But I think what we tried to do with the report was actually come out with some qualitative information. And we asked 150 event managers, and those titles, event manager and above, what they most liked about working in events. And lots of people, came back with the fact that they love the fact that it is fast paced, it's adrenaline, all of those things. And you've sort of hit the nail on the head. People really enjoy, that element of stress that drives, some real brilliance in the industry. And, I think everybody, watching this podcast will agree that this industry, can produce some pretty incredible things, against the odds. The fact that there is a deadline, you can't stop the audience coming. The curtain's going to go up. The audience are going to walk in, and that's the deadline. And the industry is quite unique for that. If you build a house and there's a delay, or you just have to shift it slightly down the road and either catch up the time or not. But the events industry is very unique in that, and that does drive some incredible, involvement from people, and some incredible skills to bear. I think one sort of key thing that we found in the report was that people really enjoy working in the industry because of some of that stress, but 86% of event managers said that they've experienced physical symptoms of stress. So, headaches, insomnia, and in some extreme cases, burnout. And I think that's what we wanted to start to try and pick apart slightly is, just using the generalized language, it's very stressful, it's not very helpful. So it's kind of starting to address how people, deal with that, or need to deal with that, post-event.
And it's interesting that the do you sleep well at night, sleep, stress and wellbeing in UK event management, to repeat the sort of the title and the strapline to the report. But a lot of there are obviously references to pre-event and how well people are sleeping pre-event. And what I'm conscious not to do today, Alex, is to go into too much detail, because what we'd love people to do who are listening to today's podcast is really go and get this report and look at all the
Absolutely.
stats and absorb it yourself. And it would be foolish for us to just go through the report in fine detail today and give everything that's in there, because it's really important that people actually read this and see how it resonates, with their own role. But one thing I noticed is it's talking about sleep before an event, but that crash that people get after an event can also affect them really, seriously as well. If things have gone brilliantly, fabulous, you'll have that adrenaline rush and you probably won't sleep anyway the night after the event, or possibly 2 or 3 nights. If things haven't gone entirely to plan, you'll be repeating things over and over and over in your head. What could you have done better? And that's also a cause of bad sleep post-event and issues post-event, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really important to recognize. And, again, I think some of that comes down to just your own, and I thinking back to my sort of freelance days, I wasn't so ingrained in a team of people, sort of post event. It's having some way of just downloading that afterwards and kind of expressing that. The industry is, as we've sort of talked about before, it has its stresses. Going through, if there's been a missed cue or something's gone wrong on site, you do play that back over and over again. And I think there are different ways of dealing with that post-event. And, I think it's important to sort of recognise, it's not just all on site. There is that bit afterwards. I think just, I remember a great, sort of event lead once describing, stress post-event, and they almost described it like sort of PTSD, or they described it, and they used language at the time, and I think there was a slight, not naivety to it, but I'm not sure that it was that helpful. If people again use that language on event sites or pre-event, about stress and about it being almost this sort of hugely terrible thing, then I think it does make it harder for people to sort of, decompress after an event. And, if you just see it all as, super, super stressful, I think it's really important just sort of to qualify that, but also, like you said, just have some way of, decompressing after event and recognizing you're going to need a bit of time to do that. It's really important.
Sure. I've mentioned briefly that the report focuses on in-house event managers, and the report itself defines that as the people inside organizations who plan and deliver events as a core part of their job. Now, you're an organization that will then be brought in, as an external agency effectively to support these in-house event managers. So in your experience of working with them, is there a question, and a valid question, around you helping to manage their own expectations in order to manage their stress levels and manage their stress related to the event? And by that, I mean, there are a lot of things that as organizers don't go perfectly behind the scenes. I'm not going to say go wrong, but you talked about missed cues or people forgetting to mention something on a particular slide during their keynote presentation, and maybe that causes a glitch in the control booth because you've got to skip on a couple. If the audience doesn't know about it, they're not aware that there's been an issue. And sometimes I feel like, as third parties coming in to support in-house event organizers, it's important to manage their expectations and make sure that if stuff does go wrong, it's okay. That's okay if that does happen. If things have gone smoothly, then and the attendees are none the wiser, then that is absolutely okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. There is a difference between, the sort of in-house team and the freelance teams coming in. Although everybody works as, sort of one big team to an end goal, I think that sort of difference is important to recognise. I think with our support of in-house teams, to your point around, how we sort of manage expectations, I think we're quite lucky that we've worked with some of our clients for over 10 years. And some clients are quite new, as in, we've only been working with them, for a year. However, one thing that we found is that when we come in, the initial meeting that we have is very much about, okay, what's happened before? What are the things that have kept you awake at night? And that is, again, I know we're sort of stop referencing the title of the report, but that is part and parcel of why it's called that. We have something called the why aren't you sleeping well at night test. And that's not just before an event, it's the things day to day that in-house teams find stressful. They find, it just makes the team, lose their sense of calm. And quite often it's about information flow. It's about stakeholder engagement. It's about giving in-house teams and in-house event managers the right information that they can feed up the chain to their stakeholders, so that the stakeholders understand exactly the types of things that you've talked about. There might be a microphone that goes down, but there will be another one in the wings. That's quite normal that someone will bring that on. Don't sweat that. The audience don't mind, and we've all been there. There's that moment of like, is the person holding the microphone ready? And there's all of that planning that goes into that moment of backup. But it's also spending enough time before the event, planning, talking it through, really working through, all of the things that you absolutely have to get right. And that's kind of the joy of events, that there is a lot of jeopardy because it's live and you're not quite sure what's going to happen, but you do work to, make it as smooth and as backed up as possible.
No, one statistic that did jump out at me from the report was the question, what keeps event managers awake? And you asked them for their top 3 factors, and of those, 81% said last minute changes, which is really curious when we're talking about, particularly about in-house event managers working perhaps in big organizations where it might be, an in-house, an internal conference with senior management and people like that. And again, from experience, a lot of senior managers in big organizations have got so many other plates that they're spinning to do with their role as a senior manager or director within an organization, that the event that they've been asked to come and deliver us 30 minutes at, the in-house company event, actually down their priority list is very low. And it's that weird side, kind of like, I don't know if you call it dichotomy, but the in-house event team, it's their absolute priority. But for a lot of the time, the people who are delivering the content at these in-house events, it's much further down their list. And so you've got this weird sort of push and pull.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things here. Part of that is education, so it's making sure that the the senior stakeholders understand if they make last minute changes, the jeopardy that can then involve. But it's also, as event professionals, having a robust on-site management, sort of protocol for that. As we all know, changing slides on the fly, probably, it really does it puts everyone at edge, because no one's quite sure what's going to happen. But I think, it's just making sure that you've got a good speaker preview area, that people can sort of work through things with enough time. And often it is just time. We did put a ban on one company just turning up with memory sticks on the fly and plugging them in at their own lectern, because things started to go wrong, and people wanted to know why. And there was quite a good meeting after the event in a wash-up to say, hey, this is why it's happening, and it's probably not what you want to hear, but it is down to your senior team turning up with changes. So actually that was really easy to fix. It's just some more time was embedded, and it's just a quick change, but it works really well. And I think everyone would agree that that feels like a good fix. But
I laugh because the last minute slide changes. Oh, I put the wrong statistic in on slide 4, and you're 2 minutes out from, lights, lights up, or house lights down, and
Yeah,
it's like, right, okay, we've got it on 3 different devices, main, redundant, and redundant 2. Are those devices now still online so that you can change it on one and they'll all sync? Are they?
yeah.
It's all those, and this comes back to kind of what I was saying in terms of managing expectations. If somebody does do that to you and drops it on you and insists on that change happening, and something goes wrong during their session, there's very little that as an event manager you can do about it, particularly in-house, if it's somebody who is effectively senior to you in the organization insisting that you make those changes. And don't take that to heart.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the conversations need to happen, and I think it's about effective, kind of whether you call it a wash up or a wrap up, post event to identify, why things are going well or why things aren't going well, and I think all of those questions are important to ask. And I think it's just, again, it's that education piece. But you're absolutely right. It's you don't want to say no. But it's having the support often of the in-house team, and those in-house event managers when they need to say, no to the senior stakeholders, which again, it's not easy, but yeah, sometimes needs to happen.
Under resourcing is another thing that kind of jumps out, and that I guess can mean a number of things. When you talk about under resourcing, in this report and in a wider context, how would you sort of define that?
So yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think a good example would be we started to work with a business probably 7 years ago, and they're a membership organisation. When we joined, they were having really, really difficult times, with supply chain and also in-house. Part of that was, I think, that they'd onboarded some businesses that just weren't supporting them effectively, weren't providing the right information and resource, and having that sort of almost briefing period to dig into that was really important. But they also had issues in-house because they didn't have enough people to deliver events. And actually, part of the work that we did with them was to point that out and say, actually, you're going to need more people here, or we're going to need to bring people in, as a freelance resource to support that, and that will deal with, a lot of the issues that they're having. It was probably, it has been a sort of 7-year process to fix, most of that. It's absolutely smooth now. Everybody couldn't be happier on both sides of the fence, but that stuff doesn't often happen, instantly. It's a very different kettle of fish if you're only working for a business once. If they just bring you in to do a specific event, but it's just being eyes wide open, and really pointing out. I think when I first started in the industry, and I was like in my 20s, and saying no felt like the worst thing in the world, and you didn't do it. You often just muddled through, and the stress and the, that ability. And I think actually thinking back to that it's really important to give people that voice. Doesn't matter where they are, within the crew. It's the combined effort of everybody on site. So you need to give everybody a voice to say, I don't think this is going to work, or there's a problem here. If you don't do that, then often, you could find that, that the technician in the background, who could have pointed out something that was going to go wrong, just didn't have an opportunity to see it, so it did go wrong. And I think, I'm thinking back to some of the jobs that I used to do, on sort of Park Lane in London, in some of those hotels, where you're sort of working 24-hour days, and inevitably, slightly more by the seat of your pants than it is now. But it's it does gives us some good learning and some good ability to pass that on, I think.
Yeah, you mentioned, the word no there, and it's a very, very powerful word that a lot of people are, as you quite rightly say, so sometimes scared to actually utter to people. And but it can be the most useful word in the event organizer's arsenal, can't it? Sometimes, if provided it's delivered in the right way, and your experience, and you've got that experience, once you realize how powerful it is to say somebody no, but this is why I'm saying no. Once you can back that up and reason as to why this is not a good idea to do this at this stage of the event, it's a good tool to have in your arsenal.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's about delivering news in the right way. I think if you just say no and walk away, it never goes down very well. But I think if you if you can talk it through, in a rational way with lots of information, and the backup of your in-house teams and and your crew, I think it very rarely is a problem. People are really happy to take advice and take things when because it's live and there's a lot of things on the line often if you're delivering information to stakeholders or customers or whatever that is, or internal audiences. I think it's fine. It's just about having the right information at the right time. But it's important to be able to say no for sure.
The experience thing was something else that jumped out at me from the report, reading it prior to today's podcast. And in terms of experience, you asked the respondents, the 150 respondents, you gave them three brackets: 1 to 3 years experience, 4 to 7 years experience, or 8+ years experience. At the 4 to 7 years one jumped out at me. I'm not going to give away what the actual statistic was and how many people are in there, but the first thing that came into my head was a year is a long time in the events industry. The experience that somebody can develop in 1 year is vast, and that 4 to 7 year sort of section, somebody who's got 4 years experience, I would argue, is significantly less experienced than somebody who's got 7 years, because that extra 3 years will count for so much in the industry. And that's a really interesting bracket there. I wonder when people read this, what they're going to sort of maybe pull apart or again resonate with them if they fit into that category.
Yeah, for sure. I think we tend to work with people across the board, and I think it's sometimes, again, the experiences that you sort of bring on through those early years and then into that sort of midterm of experience. I think it's interesting that, and sometimes until you get put into a situation where you have to download that information to someone, you don't realize how experienced you are. And I think there's a really nice, and I had it in the industry, after a number of years, where someone asked me a question and I gave an answer, and I sounded like I knew what I was talking about. And they listened and they said, "Okay, that sounds really good." And I was like, "Okay, I'm starting to sort of get my, to start to understand the industry a bit and what I should be doing." And it's a really nice moment. So I think that you're right. Absolutely, there's a real every year you might do 10 shows or 50 shows in a year, and those experiences are they do make you the event professional that you are. And it's fantastic to hear.
The sort of the final elements of the report, when people read it for themselves, you'll notice I wouldn't say conclusion would be the wrong word here, but that there are definitely sort of guidance, tips, some pointers in the right direction, some analysis of the statistics and how and what that could maybe point to. And it breaks it down into sort of really useful categories right at the end. If you're an event manager, if you manage event managers, and if you're an external partner. So there are 3 really nice sort of clear categories that people can look at, because ultimately, whether or not you only sit in one of those, the other 2 are always going to be relevant to you. And it's important that people have that understanding of other roles as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'd encourage everyone to download the report and have a look, and you can grab that from our website. It's on the front page, and I think read it and just see what resonates for you. I think everyone needs to just sort of take it as in the way that they feel resonates with them, for sure.
Yeah, and it. I mean, you mentioned there. Let's use this opportunity to sort of throw the website out there. ClinkClink.co.uk is the website to go to. We'll pop that on the screen as well, and there'll be a link in the description below the video of this on the Event Industry News website. But it's really, really easy to find, as Alex says. Just go to the ClinkClink.co.uk website. I found it under their Our Thoughts section, which is like your blog, but I think that there's a link on the homepage as well. So it's really, really easy to find. And if you just sort of search, if you wanted to, ClinkClink, sleep report, you will find it really, really easily. Just we're on the subject to sort of giving out, contact information, things like that, Alex. Presumably you guys are on the social platforms, LinkedIn, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can find me and all the team and the business on LinkedIn for sure. And yeah, there's if you want to get in touch with us directly, hit the website and or you can go to Let's Talk at clinkclink.co.uk.
Fabulous. Before we wrap up, Alex, is there, having done this and gone through the process of producing this report, is there an intention to look at this again in 5 years' time, for example, and see how things have changed? Is it intended as a one-off? Where do you stand on it?
I think, to be honest, we're not sure. What we're finding that it's generating a huge amount of conversations, with some new people that are, coming in as well, but also with our clients, and those client teams. I think we will do it again, and I think we might look at how we expand it to more people. We only picked 150 this time. But it'd be great to get more people doing it, and also. But I think one of the biggest things for us is actually we're getting our clients talking about this, with their internal teams, and it's generating some really positive results for them.
Yes, it's fabulous, and we've not even used the word well-being at the moment, but there is an element of the report that talks about well-being initiatives, leadership, the support that's available for teams, and that's part of a wider ongoing conversation in the events industry, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'd encourage anyone that takes a sort of company leadership role, give your teams plenty of time for that. Be flexible. We have a hugely flexible working week at ClinkClink. We know that everybody has to be on site for things, but we have flexible working practices. We're in the office and we work from home. If someone needs to go to a sports day for their children, go and do that. That's great. And we also give everyone an hour off every week for something called Witness of Fitness, that everyone could just go to the gym or go for a walk or whatever that is. No questions asked. So I think it's really important to just recognise that your work life's not normal life. You have something outside of that, and just go and enjoy it. And be as flexible as you possibly can, for sure.
That's great. That's great to hear, because one thing that I do think sometimes, particularly going back to the whole, the subject of today, in effect, of the in-house event managers, is that they often work for organizations who are constrained in maybe the traditional working practices in terms of Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. And, as people will testify who work in events, you will do 2 or 3 weeks work within 1 week when it's the live week. You will cram so much work into such a short period of time that a lot of the time I think that there is not an understanding of people who don't work in events, just how much you do in a short period, and that it's so important to have that flexibility. It's so important to have those other periods where you're not in full event mode, where you can have that flexibility with the understanding that when it comes to those particular weeks and moments during the year, you'll be working 2 or 3 times more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm pleased to say that the majority of organisations, if not all the organisations we work with, have a very flexible approach, because they know how hard people in events work. So it just, there needs to be a recognition for that. It's not 9 to 5, it's often unsociable hours. But the flip side of that is, have some flexibility at work and, enjoy life when you can.
Absolutely. My guest today on the podcast is Alex Pearn. Alex is the CEO of ClinkClink. We've been talking today about the Do You Sleep Well at Night report that ClinkClink have produced, sleep, stress and wellbeing in UK event management. I would encourage anybody who follows this podcast to go and download it from the clinkclink.co.uk website. It's been really well put together. It's so easy to read. It's only, we're not talking a vast, huge document here. We're talking, I think it's, 13, 14 pages, really nice PDF format, very, very well formatted, all the sort of the stuff that, you would hope goes into something like this, that makes it easy for people to read, even in snippets. You don't have to read the whole thing all the way through in one go. You can sort of pull out a page at a time, maybe digest the information that's in there. But yeah, congratulations, Alex. It's a really good report, and it's something that I hope that, anybody listening to this podcast goes and has a listen to and download. So thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for the opportunity, James. Really appreciate it.
Not a problem at all. And just before we wrap up today's episode, as usual, a few reminders for our own bits and pieces. If you are watching today's episode of the podcast on eventindustrynews.com, thank you very much for tuning in and doing so. Please do, whilst you're on the website, have a little look around at some of the other sections on there. The A to Z supplier directory, of course. If you work in the industry and you're looking for a product, a service or a supplier, the chances are you will find it on the A to Z supplier directory, as well as all of the special features and supplements that are available on Event Industry News, looking at particular niche elements. Don't forget as well the brand new wedding section that was launched at the start of this year. So if you're a venue and you deal with events, and weddings are part of those, we now have a dedicated section on the Event Industry News website that ties the wedding industry into the wider events industry. So if that's applicable to you, please do go and check it out. Of course, you may have started your journey today listening to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. If you've done that, fantastic. Thanks very much for tuning in. But please do head over to the eventindustrynews.com website and check out the video versions, as well as all those other bits and pieces that I've just mentioned that are available on the website. Which brings us to the end of today's episode. And before we wrap up, I mentioned at the very beginning, we're now in the great position to have a headline podcast sponsor, which is Present Communications. Present provides broadcast quality live, hybrid and virtual event production, trusted by organizations where reliability really matters. From corporate town halls and conferences to high-profile live streams, they design and deliver fully resilient systems that work first time. Check out Present Communications for more information. And that brings us to the end of today's podcast. Thanks very much again to my guest, Alex Pearn from ClinkClink, and we'll see you on the next edition. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Goodbye.